Ukraine appears to have counterattacked near Stepove and struck Crimea with a drone attack. Just what have they achieved, and what is the strategy, and what is going to happen in the next coming weeks? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's December 6th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, as you guys probably know, right, it is winter, and we're seeing really both sides, but Ukraine especially pivot to a defensive posture. So we're seeing a lot fewer attacks and a lot more counterattacks. So look here south of Stepove. We've talked about this town for some time, and it is operationally, or I'd say tactically significant for Russian forces because of course, their goal for the last several months has been to encircle the town of Avdiivka, cutting off the Ukrainian defenders inside. But they've had basically no success doing so. You can see that the area they're trying to cut off is crisscrossed with roadways that Ukraine is using to resupply their troops. So an important step in that process is taking the town of Stepove. And you can see Russian forces have made it basically to the outskirts of the town, and calling it a town is generous. You can see it's literally looks like, it's basically two streets with probably 600 meters of houses. So I'd say this is a hamlet, right? Maybe a population of 100 people if we're lucky. So you're in Stepove, right? Russian forces coming to sort of the gates of the town, so to speak. And then yesterday, they actually made this advance to this windbreak south of the town, likely to establish a supporting position, a support by fire position. As they hoped their forces would push into Stepove, the Russian forces sitting here would be able to do things like provide direct fire and mortar support to the troops as they moved into the town. But Ukraine had other ideas. And one of the hallmarks of defensive operations in this war is counterattacks, or what's sometimes called elastic defense. So you can see that Russian forces, right, took this area of Stepove on the first, right? They had, it looks like about 36 hours to consolidate, and now Ukrainians have counterattacked, driving the Russians out of this town or out of this intersection, meaning that they've further delayed Russia's attempt to take Stepove, right? They've put Russia back, not to square one, but they've rolled back all the effort Russia has put into the last week. You can see here, of course, this small adjustment to the front lines, which I think is mostly just symbolic because, as we've talked about, very rarely do you see troops in this war in these open fields. Instead, you see them digging and fighting positions in these forested bands. So this, depicting the front line as this and depicting it as this are basically the same. I think they're just drawing the shortest possible distance between known concentration points, right? Known defensive positions, right? So they probably have Russians like here, here, and here, and likely they're just connecting a line. But that is the only change to the front lines. When we look over at the combat map, though, you can see, again, we're not seeing reports right now of the of offensive ground actions, but I think that's just reporting. I don't think it actually means that there's no offensive ground actions. But here's what I thought was more interesting. Ukraine, the security services of Ukraine actually launched a drone attack on Russian military infrastructure in occupied Crimea this morning. And there's a couple of interesting attacks, right? One is marked here outside of Kerch. And what's interesting about this is, of course, the Kerch Bridge is a prime target for Ukrainian forces who want to disrupt Russia's ability to resupply its troops in the south. And especially given that Ukraine's really, I'd say, only meaningful offensive action is taking place here south of the Dnipro, there's a lot of incentive for Ukraine to try to disrupt Russia's ability to create logistic strong points and logistic routes here in Crimea. So launching a drone attack against what I believe are probably munition depots or logistics staging areas outside of the Kerch Bridge, right? Generally, the way these things tend to work is there tends to be a sort of, think of it as like a container yard outside of one side of a choke point, namely the Kerch Bridge, where the Russian forces are likely coming up with very specific plans about what is going to cross and when, because this is just such a narrow, vulnerable bridge. They'll sit there and say, for example, oh, we know that reports from the front lines say, hey, we're really low on fuel. So they'll sit there and take a fuel tanker out of the yard and say, you're the priority now because the need for fuel is great. So they'll have them cut the line, drive across the bridge, and then stage in another area where they'll get more specific orders about where they're heading in the front lines. So the fact that Ukraine went after that, and likely another port here, this looks like another town where they might be bringing on more logistics, more points like that, right? Where they take them up this roadway and then in to support Russian forces fighting in the south. So likely an effort to degrade Russia's ability to maintain this defense here, because as we've seen, Ukraine is focused heavily on the defensive, where it's sort of like carving out these bridgeheads and then holding them, but they haven't really expanded them because for Ukraine, logistics are a really tough nut to crack along this river. But for Russia, right, they have a much easier time because they only have to drive trucks over ground, whereas for Ukraine, they have to load things onto a boat and then dart the boat across the river and unload it and then bring the boat back. So Ukraine is trying to even the playing field with Russia. Anyway, guys, if the holidays are upon us and you guys know what that means, you need some energy to get through it. Trust me, I feel you. Energy drinks are like $5 a pop, right? The price of everything is going up. That's why I created Strike Gum. Strike Gum is inspired by my time in Afghanistan when I needed a quick hit source of energy that I could just keep in my pocket, right? Something with caffeine, something that was going to keep me focused and engaged on long combat patrols. But all we had were gross energy drinks. They were like off-brand military issue energy drinks. They were terrible. So I made this gum. I worked with a manufacturer in Denver, Colorado. It's made right here in the USA. It has 90 milligrams of caffeine. That's as much as a Red Bull or an Amp Energy. It also has 100 milligrams of alpha GPC for even more cognitive improvement and mental clarity. Best of all, 0 sugar, 15 calories apiece, and a refreshing mint flavor, not the whatever flavor you call an energy drink. Trust me, energy drink breath is just gross. I don't know what else to tell you. So if you're interested, you can check out the site at strikegum.com. We have military discounts. We have new customer discounts. We have a bunch going on here because obviously it's December. This is the time when every company, makes all their money. So if you're interested in supporting us, 50% of the profits from this first production run of Strike Gum are going to be donated to Ukrainian charities that benefit civilians who have been injured or displaced in the conflict. So if you're interested, check us out, right? And honestly, if you get the tray relative to an energy drink, this is 75 pieces of gum. So the equivalent of 75 energy drinks, which it works out to 90 cents a piece. So, what's that? A fifth of the price of getting a Red Bull in a gas station. And of course, none of the sugar. So check us out, strikegum.com. Okay. Here's what I thought was interesting about the reporting around these drone strikes that against the Russian military in Crimea. They said, of course, the Ukrainian special services hit a Russian military oil terminal, a radar system, a helicopter landing pad, a second radar system, and an anti-aircraft missile control system, which are all interesting because these radar systems, what I sort of suspect is that probably the first drone strikes degraded the ability of Russia to see the approaching targets by targeting 2 radar systems. Then they targeted the now blind anti-aircraft missile system, and then finally hit their actual target, a Russian military oil terminal. Now, this is a lot of work just to hit an oil terminal, but if you guys haven't noticed, Russia's been relying a lot on its armored forces, its mechanized forces to conduct their offensive operation. And without them, the Russian light infantry are pretty ineffective. So the Russian MOD says that it downed up to 35 Ukrainian drones, but didn't specify whether other drones struck their targets, which is usually a sign when it comes to Russia that the drones hit exactly what they were aiming for. Some people say Russia downed up to 41 drones, which again, based on sort of the norm of attacks in this war, it would make sense actually that if you told me Ukraine launched 41 drones, lost 35 of them, and had 7 or six strike their targets. I would say that's about right, given that, again, you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 targets. And probably the most critical targets got hit twice, like the oil terminal, basically. Very, very interesting stuff. And a real sign that, again, as we go deeper into the Ukraine winter, we're seeing more and more of these sort of deep strikes, right? And what this is preparing the battlefield for the spring, for March, April, May. As winter breaks, you're going to get some spring showers that are going to make things muddy and kind of difficult. But again, you're going to see a rising counteroffensive as the weather permits going into the winter. And that's what this is for both sides. This is preparing for the fighting season coming up. Believe it or not, fighting and war is a lot more weather dependent than you might think. So that was really all I had, guys. Thank you so much. As always, thanks so much to our Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Thanks a lot. See you in the next one. Cheers.